you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Valuations Podcast, brought to you by Truelytx, the premier business intelligence platform for the wealth management industry. My name is Mike Langford, and I'm the host of the Valuations Podcast. And this week, I am joined by Brian Margolis of Productivity Giant. You can find Brian at productivitygiant.com. So, perfect website, right? And by the way, you know exactly what you're going to get when you go to Productivity Giant, right? I don't have to tell you what his business is all about. He's all about productivity, and you will be a giant in your productivity life if you visit Productivity Giant. Anyways, Brian and I have a really, really exciting and interesting conversation that I think you're going to find a lot of value in. And what I was particularly excited about, first of all, was the fact that Brian found us via the call to action that I share in every single Valuations episode. He reached out via valuations@truelytx.com and said, hey, guys, I think I might have something good to share with your audience, and I'd love to be on the Valuations Podcast if you'll have me as a guest. And he and I jumped on a call, chatted right away. I thought, this guy is really smart. I like his style. I think he's interesting. And then he's like, well, I tell you what, Mike, why don't I share my book with you, and you can kind of flip through the book and see if you get some insights there, and you see if those insights are valuable for your audience. I said, sure, why not? In his book, The Index Card Business Plan for Sales Pros and Entrepreneurs, How to Use a Pillar System to Simplify Your Strategy and Magnify Your Results. I know, it sounds like a mouthful. The first part, the Index Card Business Plan, that's the title, and then the rest is subtitle stuff. Anyway, I start reading through the book, and I'm like, hey, this guy's got some substance. This is cool. He's not just your average productivity guy who's making the speaking circuit throughout all the broker-dealer and advisor conferences that are out there. And you're like, okay, here comes the other guy. I guess I'm going to get my continuing education requirements done for this. I know an asset manager sponsored this dude's speaking slot, but hey, what the heck? There's free lunch and there's a cocktail party later, right? I'm always a little bit dubious of those guys, just so you know, because, well, look, be blunt. Most of them are kind of entertaining. You're going to feel a little bit good about it. And then you're going to go back to your office and you're going to do a whole lot of nothing with that dude's presentation. But I promise you, check out Brian's stuff, right? Check out the book. You can get it at productivitygiant.com, right? But also, throughout this podcast, right? Brian and I actually have a long conversation. This is one of our longer episodes here. So, by the way, it's a podcast, so you can click pause and come back to it. You don't have to listen to it all at once. That's the value of podcasting. Listen to it where you are, when you have the time. Catch up to it when you're back and freed up and so forth, right? So listen to it while you're doing stuff, and then have your client meetings. Pause, come back, whatever. Anyway, throughout the conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about the book, a little bit about his philosophy of the pillar system. Obviously, right, Brian sells this stuff, so there's going to be some elements of where he's not going to give you all the secrets of his business, because that's how he makes his living. But you got to get enough to kind of, I think, change your perception. And one of the things is you'll hear us in the intro, the early part of the conversation, talking about the difference between being better at time management and being better at focus management, right? Because, we want to get stuff done, but really we want to focus on getting the right things done. It's not just getting a bunch of stuff done. So really, really good stuff. So I know you're going to enjoy this. Before we jump into the conversation, as always, make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform, SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and of course, tell people about this. Like us and share stuff on the socials, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and then, of course, swing by valuations@truelytx.com. and hit us up with your suggestions for who you'd like to have on the show, what you'd like to see us cover, because this show is for you. I say it every week, but this show is for you. Okay, so are you ready? Do you have your beverage? You got your earbuds? Let's do this. And now, Brian Margolis. So, Brian, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you could join us today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So this, it was interesting. You and I were chatting yesterday, and we just got introduced a couple of days ago. You reached out to Truelytx via the Valuations @Truelytx website, email, excuse me. And immediately I went over and, checked out your site. And by the way, for those who just joined us, kind of skip the intro, it's productivitygiant.com. I checked out the site. I'm like, oh, this kind of seems interesting. And they're like, oh, let's just get on a call and so forth. And I swear to God, like within a few minutes, you and I hit it off. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we absolutely can have you on the show. And I think our guests would get a lot out of it. So I'm really excited.
Myself as well. I hope our conversation goes as smooth as it did yesterday, right?
Well, it's funny. You and I were chatting right before we clicked the record button here, and we're talking about how like easy it is for certain people, certain personalities, and to just kind of be really good at talking and engaged in conversation. And of course, we both agreed there's also a skill to it. Over time, you develop some skills. So I think you and I are like the heavy hitters, right? We're like all stars. Bring it. We both love to talk, and I think by nature of our careers, we've probably developed some skills at it
No doubt.
So, I like to start out every episode of the show with a bit of an IMDb journey, the Internet Movie Database of your life. Like, how did you get here, right? So if you're like me, you're watching a movie or you're watching a show, you find yourself going, oh, who's that guy? Or what was that lady in before? Or, hey, how many movies has that person been in? And you find yourself scrolling through their IMDb history to kind of figure out, like, how did they get to this movie or show that you're watching? And it's a really fun, I think, icebreaker for the audience, too, to kind of understand where you came from and how you ended up with Productivity Giant, and then of course the book, which we'll dive into a little bit more in depth here as we go through the episode. So maybe you kind of just tell us a little bit about your experience and what led you to creating Productivity Giant.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, probably not uncommonly, but I grew up wanting to be Jacques Cousteau. That was me,
is
right?
Uncommon, I think. I love Jacques Cousteau.
Oh, who doesn't, right? And so I always grew up dreaming that I'd be scuba diving for a living one day and playing with the sharks and the fish and the whales. And that's always what's fascinated me. Anything to do with water, whether it's the ocean, streams, lakes. And so I followed that passion. I went to school for science, undergrad and grad, and I eventually became a research scientist, a fisheries scientist, an environmental scientist, depending on what angle you're looking at. And so I was a research scientist for a number of years, ran my own program. And man, if there was ever a job to love, I had it. And which is why I realized very quickly I wasn't meant to have a job, right? Because still the idea of having to be somewhere every day, not charting your own path, things like that, wasn't for me. So like most naive people, I just thought I'd start a business, right? And I've actually, without going into all those trials and tribulations, I've actually been an entrepreneur now for almost 2 decades, if not more, since the time I started my first business, eventually went full time. And a few years ago, for the first time in a long time, I had sold a business. I had stopped another one, and I went from always having stuff going on to not having a lot going on. It was kind of weird. It happened so quick. And up until that point, I never thought about consulting, coaching, helping other entrepreneurs and salespeople. It was just something I had done, for people who either worked with me or were on my team and things like that. And what started happening was when I realized what took me years and years and years to kind of figure out and reverse engineer on my own, all of a sudden I'm sharing it with people and they're going, oh my God, tell me more, help me with that. And so it became fun. It became fun helping other people kind of for a living. And so that's where I'm at now. Do a lot of coaching, a lot of consulting, specifically on helping people simplify their business, simplify their strategy. And I think you and I discussed off a line that, I'm patient zero. I thought I was the only mess out there, right? I was the only one working way too many hours. I was the only one who had trouble focusing. I was the only one who, was kind of stuck and couldn't concentrate and, was changing directions all the time, shiny object syndrome. And what I realized was I was actually normal, right? This was most people. And so what it took me years and years to kind of figure out for myself, this system of simplification, I'm now able to share with people, anyone from, I've worked with Shark Tank entrepreneurs to people who, lawyers own law firms to financial advisors and such. So it's been an interesting journey. It definitely, no one would have predicted this, right?
Right, exactly. That's what's funny. And I think that, it's always funny. I always joke with people that very few people's lives professionally are like Justin Timberlake, right? If you think about Justin Timberlake, super famous performer, started out as a child star, Mickey Mouse Club, then went on to, NSYNC or whatever his band was there, boy band was. And then, of course, solo artist. Oh, by the way, he happens to be super handsome, very funny. He's decent at acting, all that type of stuff. Like, so his life is like up and to the right consistently, nonstop, perfect, never had a major dip or massive change of direction that was required, right? Very few people's lives are like Justin Timberlake's lives, right? Most of us,
I would agree with that.
Right? Most of us have ups, downs, backtracks, side tours, detours down a path or something. And even if you've been in the same industry for your entire adult life, most people can attest that there have been a variety of times where there have been either a lot of uncertainty, some setbacks, or a requirement for somebody to stop and change direction a little bit in order to either stabilize or have the ability to move forward. So I think it's really great how you kind of shared your story and that you were able to kind of like empathize that way, because I think many people think of like, financial advisors as an example, who's, the Truelytx audience, is they think of they're steady, kind of no nonsense, really conservative folks, yada, yada, yada. But the reality is, I think a lot of what you just described is experienced by advisors as well.
Sure.
They're human, right? And I love how you pointed out that, many of these people, yourself included, you want to chart your own course, right? You want to own your future. And I think many advisors get into the business for that very reason, right? I'm going to be able to make good money. It's going to be consistent revenue. And I'm going to kind of be able to manage my life.
Yeah,
and then
help people. It seems to
right.
it seems to have it all, right?
Exactly right. But what's really funny is, those people who are outside of the industry don't always realize how much these folks are on their own in many ways. I mean, most of the advisors that we deal with are either in an RIA model, right, registered investment advisor model, or they're in a broker-dealer model, independent broker-dealer, which means the advisor, his or herself, owns their own business, and they attach their license to an independent broker-dealer to conduct business, to be able to broker and custody client assets. And then that broker-dealer has some overview of their business, but really you're kind of on your own. It kind of brings me a long-winded way of kind of segue into the question of why should advisors and broker-dealers take a fresh look at their productivity and explore, your strategy, which, by the way, I skimmed through the book last night because, again, I mentioned we've only known each other for like 2 or 3 days now. I skimmed through the book last night, and it was really, really interesting, right? Your index card planning strategy. In the intro to the book, I thought it was a fantastic point. I literally had an aha, he's 100% right on this. That you mentioned that focus is often the greatest constraint for a business person's life, and or personal life as well. Less so than time is, and many people think it's just time. I don't have time to learn this new thing. I don't have time to bring on new clients or innovate in my business. So I thought that'd be a great way for us to kick off, like kind of diving in deep on your
sure,
your book, your recommendations, your strategies that you recommend to people. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and what I'm talking about. When I'm using examples here and we're talking about this, I don't care what the outside world calls you. I look at financial advisors as business owners. I look at them as solopreneurs or entrepreneurs, depending on how they look at it. But I think the reason advisors are attracted to this so much, and why I have examples of them in the book, because I've dealt with so many of them, both directly and indirectly, is because they're the classic example of, they're on their own. They're a financial advisor, but they're also in sales, but they're also an entrepreneur. And they often fall into the trap that, being good at something is different than being successful. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at the world of financial advisors, being a good financial advisor to your clients and being good at what you do with the money and how you help them and the decisions is is not not an indicator of how successful your practice will be, right? They're a different skill set. And so I think that we need to frame this interview that way, that I'm talking to business owners. I'm not talking to financial advisors, right? That's a trade, right? Your financial advising skills, those are trade skills. We're talking about the skills of running your business.
That's a really great distinction, by the way, and one that Terry Mullen, CEO here at Truelytx, likes to make often, is that too often advisors refer to themselves as having a financial practice, and he wants them to think of having a financial business. And I think you're highlighting that concept a lot here.
Well, I mean, there's advisors out there, let's be honest, who have huge practices, have tons of AUM, have tons of clients. And if you looked under the hood, you probably wouldn't let them manage your dog's money, right? And there's probably other advisors who are great. They're caring. They understand the psychology of helping people make good decisions, because I believe that's a big part of it, right? It's not just managing their money, but helping people make good decisions. Yet they struggle, right? They struggle, yet they're the advisor you would want. And so if you're mature enough to separate those skills, I think it allows you to open up, right? And I know you wanted to talk about the focus, but I think this is important background to getting there, because most advisors, where they're at right now in their business, most, not all, it's kind of a combination of their work ethic, right? They're not afraid to put in the hours, the hustle, all that kind of stuff. And you combine that with their skills and their talents, and you can grind your way to a certain practice, right? To a certain size practice. But I think after a while, you can't grind past a certain point. And if you want to run a successful business, if you want to go to that next level, you have to have a strategy, an actual strategy, not a strategy to get everything done, but a results-based strategy. And so I'm saying all that because you're asking about focus management versus time management. That's where you wanted to start. And that's what I believe the strategy needs to be based around. This idea that, look, the evidence is all around you. Time is not your limiting resource. Because if you were to plot out all the financial advisors in the country and the world, and whatever measure of success you want to look at, AUM, number of clients, gross revenue, it doesn't matter. And then on the other axis, you put how many hours a week they work. Well, you'd have successful advisors who work 20 to 25 hours a week, and you'd have unsuccessful advisors and everything in between. Then you go all the way up to the 70, 75 hours a week, and you'd probably have successful advisors, and you'd also have unsuccessful advisors, at least in their own eyes. And so I think the evidence is all around us that, time is not the limiting constraint. My thesis is that, as you talk about, is that your ability to focus on cognitively demanding activities, that's your limiting resource. In any given day, all right, in any given day, your ability to focus on these high leverage, cognitively demanding activities is going to run out long before the day runs out, right? I mean, honestly, on the average day at 3:30 in the afternoon, are we doing our best work? Are we absolutely 3:30 to 5, man, I'm a prospecting machine, right? I'm standing up in my office and I'm getting after it and I'm coming up with great strategies. And that's just the reality. That's how humans are built. And so, this is maybe the longest winded answer you've ever gotten, but
it's fine. I like it. No, it's good stuff. It's good.
But the reality is that you have to accept the fact that it's this focus, it's this mental energy that limits you. And once you've accepted that and you understand that, then you build a strategy around focus management, not time management, right? Where do I use this limited focus I have? How do I get the biggest return on my investment?
I think that's a really important observation and thought exercise for somebody to, who's listening to the podcast now, to just let, almost press pause and let that sink in a little bit, right? Because, you have the same amount of time every day as Elon Musk, right? Completely different industry, but here's this dude who's running, 2 multi-billion-dollar companies. You have the same amount of time a day as Jack Dorsey, who runs Twitter and runs Square, right? The big payment platform. So how are those people, and granted, not everybody's going to run a multi-billion-dollar business or two multi-billion-dollar businesses, but these people who we see as extraordinarily productive in their lives have the same amount of time as you do. What is it that's different, right? And so, and it sounds kind of like, that success guru-ish, but no, the reality is they found a way to focus on the right things at the right time for the right amount of time, and not let other things distract them. And it's really interesting. You kind of hit on something that I've often talked about for advisors is that, look, for most advisors getting started, this business is a business of attrition. That if you ask most advisors, particularly top performers, how long did it take before you felt successful? Most of them will tell you it was 5 years. 5 years of grinding, right?
The compound effect.
Exactly right. And then all of a sudden they look up, they've been in the business for 5 years. It's like, you know what? I may have only made $20,000 a year in year one, but now I've finally grown my practice to the point where I'm making a solid six-figure income. And I'm starting to see some growth just based on existing clients. And now I'm getting referrals, right? And all that type of stuff starting to happen. But as you mentioned, at a certain point in time, there's a bit of a wall, right? There's, hey, I've now exhausted being a solopreneur. I can't fit more clients in. There's only so much stuff I can do. And they find themselves kind of trapped a little bit, right? And they haven't really built it into a business, right? And if you want to define a business is something that can operate without you, right? That you can actually take a vacation and come back and the business is still there.
Correct.
Right. And clients were served and people were able to buy your product, or in this case, acquire your services, or a new client is added. Right. So, how do you recommend, all that, my long-winded kind of response to you, right? Like, how do you recommend, advisors and wealth management leaders improve their focus to become more productive? Because, one of the things that I found myself doing when I was reading the book was nodding along in the first few pages there. You had this one index cards, which had like 5 bullet points on it. And you asked the question, like, does this look like the strategy for 40% business growth and, losing 35 pounds over the next year? And it's really kind of interesting because you had boiled down those goals into like 5 easy to follow bullet points.
Yes.
So talk about that a little bit. Like, how do people boil down all the crap they got going on in order to get that level of focus and simplicity?
All right. So there's 2 questions there. The first question is, how do you improve your focus, right? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, right now, if you're starting out, if you're not already kind of using the pillar system, which is what we're talking about here, mm-hmm. The answer is you don't improve your focus. I'm not even going to ask you to. What I'm going to ask you is to manage your focus, right?
Okay.
Whatever number you have, whatever your ability right now to focus, the mental energy reserves you have, where are you spending that? That's the more important thing to work on. Because just improving your mental energy, if you get better sleep, better nutrition, you meditate, so you learn how to concentrate better, you do all those things, you can have all the energy in the world, all the mental energy in the world. If it's not directed in the right place, it really doesn't matter, right? It's like a fly getting faster, but still flying into the window. It doesn't, it's got to be put in the right direction. So I'm not so worried at this early stage on them improving focus. There are ideas in the book for that toward the end, but it's more about managing what you have right now. As far as the second question, how do you boil your business down to these areas you need to focus on? That actually is what the pillar system is. So it's just a series of questions that get answered. And then once you answer those questions, you run them through a filter of 6 characteristics. And then what comes out the other side are these potential pillars. And then you select them based on impact, right? So I don't want to waste the time today to actually walk through the whole process. I don't think that's
right.
We can talk a little bit about it, but listen, there's no one listening to this call that wouldn't agree that finding the right things to do and then doing them consistently is a recipe for success, right? We hear that all the time. Focus on the right things, your priorities, this and that, your top 3, and then execute on them consistently. What the pillar system is it's a process to figure out what those right things actually are. And one of the earliest things you and I talked about was that one of the assumptions out there that I think is absolutely wrong, but I hear it from sales managers and management all the time, is my advisors, my team, the people in my broker dealer or my reps or whatever it is, they know what to do, right? They know the right things to do. I just got to get them to do it. And I completely disagree with that. I don't think they know the right things to do. I think they know generalities, right? They use those words that have no kind of agreed upon definition is the way I usually say it, right? So they use words like, oh, I have to get in front of more of the right people. I have to focus more on that or optimize this, double down, get better at, right? Well, that's a good starting point. But when we talk about what are the right things to do, I want to boil it down to what are, on a week-to-week basis, what are the activities that you control, not your goals, right? Oh, I want to meet with 10 new prospects a week. That's a goal, okay? What are the actual activities, the part you control? And we need to unwind it to that point. And that's why when you see an index card like that at the beginning of the book, and everyone goes, oh, this is so simple. Well, it is simple, but it took a while. It took a process to get to everything you could do with your time during the week to what are those few things, if I do, will have the biggest return on investment. So it's more of a process, right? It's more of a process, a series of questions, things like that.
Well, and I think that, meshes very nicely with what an advisor does for their clients, right? You think about the way that an advisor interacts with his or her clients. They talk about the process. They talk about if it's a client who comes in who doesn't have a huge amount of assets to manage, they talk to that client about how do we get started? How do we start adjusting your spending and savings amounts, right? So that you can start accumulating assets. And then part of the process is choosing the right investments. And then part of the process is, thinking about your goals over the future. So it's very similar, I think, to what advisors do for their clients. So they should be familiar with this.
Let's be honest. Of all the industries we could be talking about, who talks the most about the compound effect, right? The compound interest. I mean, advisors know that whatever they do is going to compound, right? And with time. And so if you make poor decisions early on in life, your financial life, and you continue, to work off those decisions year in and year out, the place you wind up being versus where you could have been by making better decisions and letting them compound, it's night and day. It's the poorhouse versus not having to work the last 20 years of your life.
Right.
And so it's no different here. It's the compound. Listen, the compound effect's already happening, whether you like it or not, right? We already are a result of those little decisions. All I'm suggesting here is use a process to get it down to those few key things and then let the compound effect work.
Really smart.
And hit them consistently.
That's right. So real quick before we move on to kind of like the next little question I had here, like one of the things I try to ask this of, I think most call it service providers, professional service providers into the industry, because I've seen this happen too often, the objection, right? So a lot of the last several years, I have been evangelizing the use of social media for financial advisors, right? Here at Truelytx, we are evangelizing the concept that advisors need to have a proper succession plan in place, because it's not if you will eventually transition out of your business, it is a when. It will happen. At some point in time, you'll stop being an advisor, and your clients will need whoever their next advisor is, and your family, right, will want to make sure that your business, all the stuff that you've built up over time, transitions to another firm or another individual, and they receive value for it, right? That it, all of a sudden it just doesn't vaporize. So I think people understand the importance of it, just like you mentioned, but oftentimes there's a little bit of a pushback, right? There's the, well, look, Brian, this sounds great and all, right? But you don't really understand how complex my business is, my personal life is right now. I just don't have time to look at this or whatever. It doesn't work for me. That might work for other advisors, but you just don't understand my business. How do you help people over those types of objections, or have you heard those objections? I assume you may have heard something similar.
Every day. Every time I take on a client, at some point early on, two things happen. Number one, about 8 out of 10 of them tell me, Brian, I think I have ADD. And they're not joking. They think they're undiagnosed. And I know there's real diagnosis for ADD. I'm not talking about that. And it's not something it's not even something I'm qualified to talk about. But most of them early on assume that they're different than everyone else. They're scattered. They have trouble concentrating. And I usually make them feel better by just saying, no, I just diagnosed you as human, right? But the second most common thing I hear early on is, Brian, you don't get it. It's different for me. Brian, you don't get it. That doesn't work in my industry, or that doesn't work for me because, and they tell me all the reasons this can't work. I get it. And here is the solution. Okay. The solution is a very simple change of reference. You have to change the reference. You have to reframe it. Most of them, when they say my business is too complex, it's got too many things. It's, I'm morning till night. I got to do this and I got to do that. They're looking for a strategy to get everything done. And I want to be clear about something. That's a very different kind of strategy. Okay. They're saying, I need something so I can get all of this done, so I can cross everything off the list. That's not the kind of strategy you want. Because no matter how good your strategy is, there's always going to be more to do, right? Instead, you want to, and I know this sounds so common, but think about it. You want a results-based strategy, meaning your goal isn't to get everything done. It's not to answer every call. It's not to make every single person happy. It's not to cross every T and dot every I. Your goal, okay, at its most basic business level, is to grow your AUM, right? For, I'm assuming we got fee-based and things like that, or obviously gross commissions if you're the other way. But you have a goal, whatever that goal is. The strategy is designed to get you to that goal, not to make sure every fire is put out, everything is perfectly in its place, everything is handled. Does that make sense? And so
absolutely makes sense.
They're looking at it the wrong way. The reality is they don't have to do most of the stuff they're doing. It's kind of like when you pack for a trip, right? And you have a plane to catch the next day, you're going on vacation. It's the old, Parkinson's law, right? The task will expand to the time you give yourself to do it. If every advisor was to start their day, let's say they start at 8:00 and they go till 5, just as an example, and then they have to be home for something. If every advisor started their day at 10:00 and went to 5, now they won't feel this way on day one, I get it, but over the course of a month, 6 months, a year, they're going to get all the same crap done, right? All the reactive stuff, the dealing with people, the fitting in, it's all going to get done. That's Parkinson's law, okay? We experience it every day. So when you're thinking results-based, you're not thinking about getting it all done. And I think that's how that has to be reframed, right? They have to, and it's not easy to think that way because I don't want to say we're raised, but we came up in a world where it was very industrial training. It was about effectiveness, right? Everything was all about being effective and efficient. And let's be honest, your goal is not always to be effective and efficient. You're going to leave money on the table. That's okay. Things aren't going to get replied to. That's okay, right? I's aren't going to get dotted. That's okay. That's not your goal.
Right. That's a really important way of reframing the conversation. It's kind of like, people who feel like they're losing their mind because they didn't, clean up their desk or, they're not, they haven't gone out and bought a new shirt and tie in a while, right? And they're feeling like their fashion might be a little outdated or something. That's maybe not the best example, but your point is, hey, look, what's the most important thing that you want to accomplish? What is your goal? And let's make sure those activities are happening, right?
100%. Yes.
Very interesting. So, I could see and the other thing that I see, with, advisors or in this space, I think this is with everybody, like you said, it's they're human, right? Is they get started. So some of them are going to be kind of pushing back and resisting because they don't want to make changes. And then some people are going to be that person who like rushes the stage after you give your talk and they can't wait to like pick your brain and say they want to get started. They're just so gung-ho. They've joined the gym, right?
Right.
They've run out and joined the gym. This is a year they get the beach body and they are ripped and ready to go. But then relatively quickly, people start to fall off, right? They start to, okay, the enthusiasm wanes, that pain in the butt item pops up on their calendar. They get distracted and then the focus wanes, right? So what do you recommend to help people kind of stick with it over time?
Yeah, so that's what the second part of the book goes into, because obviously identifying the right things is critical, and then doing them consistently is just as critical, right? You need both. You can't have one without the other. Where I have come to find out works the most is I like to work with human nature, not against it. You know, this idea, everyone listening to this, they either know it consciously or they know it from experience, but willpower doesn't work long term. Motivation doesn't work long term, right? You can't count on those things. You can't count on being disciplined. All right. In fact, I have a great thing to tell you about later about being disciplined if we have time. The lie of discipline, it's called in a great book. But so really, if anything's going to change in your life, everyone knows this, you have to create a habit, right? Mm-hmm. Well, habits are not easy to create intentionally. We create them all the time, but they're not easy to create intentionally. And so if you want to improve your life, I got to have a workout habit and an eating well habit. And for my business, I need a habit of prospecting and I need a habit of this. And so what I've done with the pillar system is I said, no, just develop one habit, the super habit. That's it. Just one habit. And that habit, and that's what the custom accountability program in the book talks about, is the habit of pillar execution. Meaning every week you get to the point where there's this open loop in your brain and it has to be closed. It's an itch that has to be scratched. It's that urge when you leave your house and you think you left the door wide open and you're going away for the weekend, right? You just can't let it go till you turn around. You get to the point with pillars where pillar execution, not the individual pillars, but pillar execution becomes a habit. You see, when you create that one habit, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, everything else falls into place. Let me give you an example. I don't like working out. I've never liked working out. I want to like working out. It sounds everyone who loves working out, it makes it sound great. They talk about endorphins and they talk about runner's high and all that stuff, how they feel. I've never felt any of it, right? I just haven't. I don't know what's wrong with me. If you told me I could live a long, healthy life tomorrow and never work out, my treadmill would go right out the window, right? I just have no desire. Oh, don't you like to work out to release stress? Nope, not me. I don't. But here's the thing. I work out more consistently, not that this is a very high bar, but I work out more consistently than probably 95% of the country. And the only reason I do is because I have a workout pillar and I work out more to hit my pillars than to do the workout, if that makes sense. In other words, the urge to get on the treadmill, the urge to do the number of reps I have to do for certain things is driven by the fact that pillar execution is a habit to me. It's a borderline sickness, but it's a great sickness to have, which is I hit my pillars. That's what I do for a living, right? That's how I keep my life where it needs to be. And so I like to say the thing that works here is that you only really have to develop one habit, and that habit is pillar execution. So whatever your pillars wind up being, because they're going to change over time, you know they're going to get done because that's a loop that has to be closed. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's absolutely. I think that's it's kind of that approach that, it almost feels like you hear people talk about making something automatic, right? So as an example, an advisor would recommend to a client who's looking to improve their retirement prospects to use their 401k, automatic, payroll deduction and investment into the 401k, right? It's basically becoming an automatic thing that you don't have to think about. And while the pillars don't seem like they're as automatic because you do still have to think about them. There's a conscious choice to do things because you're building it into your consistent behavior. It just works, right? It doesn't require as much effort.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a diagram in the book. There is a hill you have to get over, right? That hill of habit, meaning you put in the effort over a short period of time, right? Over a period of time. And the way I do it in the book is with this process, the custom accountability program is designed to work, again, with human nature, not against it, right? It doesn't just say tough it out and get it done. There's actual strategies based on your personality that you can use to make sure you're hitting your pillars every week until, such a time that it becomes habitual, right? Mm-hmm. Anytime you're working against human nature for a long period of time, you can do it for short periods of time, but if you're going to do it for long periods of time, it's over. You don't even start, right? This idea, these motivational speakers and these people who say, oh, we were built for success. You were destined to succeed. I guess as a scientist and understanding biology, no, you're not. You're designed for survival. You're designed for comfort. You're designed for short-term thinking, right? We're not designed naturally to make good decisions now for 20 years from now. It's just not how we're built. But we do have this thing called habit in our brain. This idea that if we think a certain way for a long enough period of time, or we do a certain activity long enough, eventually our brain, as a mechanism for saving energy, will take those neurons that fire together, so to speak, the fire together, wire together thing, and it will move them into the automated part. Now I'm simplifying this, but it'll move them into the automated part of your brain for no other reason than to save energy. And so, although that works against us sometimes, it also can work with us, if you understand.
I love that. I love that kind of analysis. It kind of feels like, we have over time evolved as a species, right, for pattern recognition. And so to your point, if the pattern recognition becomes such that we develop habits, and habits become just a way of doing things, we don't have to think about them. And to your point, your brain and your physical body will kind of respond by like, let's save energy. We'll just do this thing automatically. That's really interesting.
And that's exactly what a habit is, though. So there's this book out there, and sorry if I'm going too long, but this is critical. There's this book called The One Thing by Gary Keller. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but
I have heard it. Have not read it.
Gary Keller, guy who started Keller Williams, him and Jay Papasan write this book, and they have a section in there called The Myth of Discipline. And I'll just quote it for you. Here's exactly what it says. It said, there is this pervasive idea that the successful person is the disciplined person who leads a disciplined life. It's a lie. Okay, so they start off by telling you it's a lie. Contrary to what most people believe, success is not a marathon of disciplined action. Success is actually a short race, a sprint fueled by discipline, just long enough for habit to kick in and take over. And so what they're saying is, have you ever gone to the gym, had to go to the gym early in the morning, right? Yeah. Okay, and there's those everyone's tried it at some point, or most people, and you last a couple of weeks and that's it. But there's those people there that are, they've been doing it for years, right? They know the janitor and they're happy to be there and whatever. And the assumption is they're more disciplined than us. And that couldn't be further from the truth. At some point, they paid the price, the escape velocity, right? They put in the energy to break that gravitational pull where they started going to the gym in the morning to the point where now it's actually easier for them to go to the gym than not go to the gym. Their feet take them to their drawer and to the car the same way that our feet take us to the coffee maker, take them to the bathroom, right?
Right.
And that's what he's saying there is, look, put in the short-term work, and in my case, using the CAP strategies to develop the discipline of the habit of pillar execution. And long after you've developed that habit, it will continue to serve you. And people look at me now that know me and think I'm disciplined, or I'm different, or I'm odd. And it couldn't have been, it can't be further from the truth. I used to be a complete mess. Like everyone.
Yeah, right. No, it's true. It's great. That's fantastic. I really think that's a brilliant approach. Just force yourself into discipline for a short period of time until it becomes a habit, yeah. Right?
And I wouldn't even use the word force. I would say use these strategies. There are strategies. It could be a different conversation, but There are strategies that work short term to help you develop the long-term habit.
Great. So to bring it all on home and kind of, connect it to what we're doing here at Truelytx, I saw a lot of parallels, and that's one of the reasons why I was so eager. Like when we first started chatting, I'm like, I got to get this dude on the podcast like as quickly as possible, right? Because with Truelytx, it's a business intelligence platform for the wealth management industry, right? So whether it's at the enterprise level or an individual advisor, you can put all the information about their business into the system, and it really produces a lot of intelligence about what's happening in the business. At the high level, it's the valuation. How much is this business worth compared to other businesses that have similar attributes, right? Same level of AUM, same number of advisors, same number of clients, and so forth. Same revenue structure, right? Whether it's a fee-based structure or commission-based structure or what have you. And so there's this beautiful evaluation report that spits out once you put all that information in there, and it will take you through these 3 pillars, if you want to call it that, right? Like to kind of keeping with the pillar approach of business stability, client stability, and market stability, your grades on where your business stands. And then, of course, you dive deeper into all the elements that roll up into these tiles, these pillars to help you improve your business. I wonder if we can kind of just spend a couple of minutes here as we close it out to talk about like how do you help somebody make the connection to the things they're trying to accomplish in their business or the weaknesses that need to be improved in their business, and using your system. Where have you seen that?
So let's kill 2 birds with one stone here, because one thing I don't want to leave this interview not doing is giving some examples of pillars,
Sure.
right? Because at this point it's all been theory and stuff. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. So the Truelytx platform, the analysis that it spits out, these reports. Give me an example of something it might tell an advisor they have to do more of or focus on, or a shortcoming or a gap, right? Well, what's something that it could show?
So as an example, you may, one of the key ones that we see for a business is they lack a continuity plan or they lack a succession plan, right? And that's a big ding on the business's value, right? And their score, because, in the worst case scenario, if you're an advisor and you're rolling with a solo practice and you have no continuity plan, you have no succession plan for who takes over after you, what happens if you get hit by the proverbial bus?
Or the real bus.
What happens? Or the real bus, right? What happens to your clients? What happens to your family, right? Chances are your business will be worth way less than you think it is, because it's going to be a fire sale situation. Clients are going to just flow wherever they flow. There's no, hey, listen, so-and-so is swooping in and taking over, and your clients already know that, Joe will be taking over. So that's a classic example, and one that we spend a lot of time on.
So what would normally happen after the average advisor reads that is they might say, man, this year I really got to focus on putting together a continuity plan. Or I really got to make it a priority to start working on my continuity plan, right? That's how they will talk. And again, having a continuity plan is a goal, right? It's not an activity; it's a goal.
Sure.
So you've identified the goal. Let's roll it back to an action they control every week. What could be one of their pillars if they decided that this was important enough? It could be, without getting into the weeds here, it could be as simple as saying, I'm going to spend 60 minutes a week working on my continuity plan. And at the beginning, it could be as general as that, because honestly, at the beginning, you might not be able to be specific. You might have to say something like, I need to learn more about continuity plans, right? I need to understand what the things I have to do to put in place the continuity plans, right? What are the pieces? I want to do some homework. So it could start out that general. It could wind up in a more specific pillar where you say, okay, I'm at the point now where I need to bring a junior on board, right? I need to bring a junior advisor on board, or I need to find that person that's going to take over my business. Well, now we can get down into the nitty gritty of pillars for that person. And guess what? That could be, you could have a pillar of 2 phone interviews a week. Not having them, because you don't control how many you have, but I want to schedule 2 phone interviews a week. So you put some ads out there, right? You're going to get some resumes and maybe some other advisors who maybe want to consider taking over your business eventually, right? So you put the ads out there for a junior or for the other advisors or however you're going to do it. And now by saying you have to schedule 2 phone interviews a week, well, guess what? Now when these resumes come in, you're going to be forced to look at them, right? When these people connect with you or when someone doesn't connect with you, you're going to follow up with them. You're going to reach out. And the way you need to think about it is, man, if I'm talking to 2 people a week, 2 people a week, 2 people a week on average, right? You're scheduling 2. You might not have 2. You might have 5 in 1 week. But I'm scheduling 2 phone interviews. I'm scheduling 2 phone interviews. I'm scheduling 2 phone interviews. 6 months, a year from now, you're going to have had a lot of conversations, right? I find it hard to believe that you're not going to understand, maybe not who you're going to bring on board, but at least you're going to know what you're looking for and what you're not looking for, right? And so again, I'm not using, I'm trying to make this as broad as possible, but phone interviews could wind up being the pillar after, or it could just be spending time, right? Or it could be if you already have a junior, well, yeah, your paycheck's not going to change Friday if you don't train your junior every week or work on their personal development and their financial advisor development. But long term, that could be very impactful to your business, right? That's a multiplier. Yeah. And so that's a classic pillar where you might say, okay, I'm going to spend 90 minutes a week or 60 minutes or whatever it is working with my junior on, his or her development, right? That's what Rory Vaden would call a multiplier. Meaning you put in the work you get paid big on the leverage that later.
What I love about the approach you just described there, and I think this is kind of a good way to end it and kind of get on to the, just kind of getting your contact information for everybody, because I know they're going to be interested. And we're almost at an hour here, I think. You've removed the overwhelm, I think, from the process. And to me, that was one of what I started hearing and feeling, right, as I started thinking about, oh man, if I had to create a succession plan, how stressful would that be, right? Because you're thinking about your own personal mortality and your business mortality. You're thinking about the amount of work that goes into it. You're thinking about probably the expense, right? Because you're probably going to have some attorneys involved and other people involved. To your point, how many people am I going to have to talk to if I don't have somebody already lined up as the person I'd like to have as being my successor? So I can imagine the advisor feeling a bit overwhelmed by the concept, right? But the process you just described kind of removes some of that stress and simplifies it down, which I think is the overall, if you were looking for one real message, right, in your book and the teachings that I've taken away, is like simplification matters, right? Make things a little simpler.
People don't get overwhelmed because they have a lot to do. Or else we'd all be overwhelmed at all times because there's always stuff we could be doing. You get overwhelmed when you have a lack of clarity, right? That's what is the next step? What is the next step? When you're clear on that, you're not overwhelmed. When you're overwhelmed, it's just this abstract thing in your head of all these things you have to do. It's not really in a plan or on an index card. It's just all over the place. So overwhelm comes from that lack of clarity. And that's why, again, throughout the book, I think there's kind of 2 things to take away. And one is, if you don't have a strategy, a week-to-week strategy to get the results you want, get a strategy, whether it's the index card business plan, the pillar system or not. And then the second one is, make sure that you actually consistently execute on that strategy. Sounds simple enough.
Right. It does. Well, this has been fantastic, Brian. I really do appreciate you carving the time out of your day. I know you were busy. You mentioned you had some client stuff going on today. So we found the one slot in the day that we could get together. And I'm really glad you made yourself available for recording the show. I know for a fact, right, that people are going to want to reach out to you, whether they're individual advisors or the enterprise, large broker dealers or RIAs or wirehouses, for whether it's for speaking or just bringing you in for consulting and so forth. What are the best ways for people to learn more about the business and to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way to learn more about what I do, to get in touch with me, the free reports and all my I'll say all my connections and stuff like that is just the website, productivitygiant.com. And if you go to productivitygiant.com, if you want the book or if you want the free report, there's links there to buy the book, to grab the free report, all that kind of stuff. So one location, productivitygiant.com. Let's keep it simple.
Perfect. And are you on social media channels at all? Does people want to follow you there?
I'm on LinkedIn at this point.
Okay.
Yep.
So perfect. All right. So we'll make sure we get you linked up in the show notes. Well, once again, Brian, I really do appreciate you taking the time. I loved having you on the show, and maybe we'll do another show together in the future.
I appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. All right. Huge thank you to Brian Margolis for joining us today and sharing some of his wisdom with us. Hey, look, I get it. Like, he is selling his services, right? So he's hoping that you reach out to him for his consulting offerings. He is hoping that you reach out to him for speaking engagements, and he's absolutely hoping you go get the book. But that doesn't make his time spent with us any less generous. I really am extremely appreciative of Brian spending time with us today, because during this podcast, I am sure you got a nugget or two of applicable insights that you can go ahead and implement in your business life or your personal life to make yourself more productive. Or at a minimum, it raised your curiosity. It got that kind of that bug in your ear a little bit, like, hey, I got to go make some stuff happen here, right? I got to go to Truelytx. I got to focus in and dial in on my business a little more. I got to focus on succession planning. I've got to get my valuation done. I've got to look at what's working, what's not working. I got to see how do I compare with other businesses that are comparable to mine, right? Hopefully that stuff kind of got bubbling in your brain, and you take the next step. You put that into productive action, right? So thank you very much, Brian. I think this is really, really helpful. I know I got a lot of value out of it. And of course, thank you for listening, right? This show wouldn't be anything without you. It is for you. And it sounds corny and quaint, but it's really, really true. This is your show. So as your show, please send in suggestions. Be like Brian. Reach out to us at valuations@truelytx.com or swing by our socials, right? We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or of course, you can always swing by truelytx.com and click on the contact page and send us a little note. Love to hear from you. We want to make sure that we're producing the best quality show for you and make sure we have the people on the show and the topics that you want to hear. So until next week, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a productive day. And we'll see you next time on the Valuations Podcast. Bye.